I'm me. I don't get bored.
How could you ever get bored?
Really? If you're me?
He is so unique, very authentic.
He's a puzzle. He is an enigma, and also like a magnet.
I think there's just nothing that Paul can't do.
To know Paul just as a person, it's creative thinking. I mean, the guy is so clever.
This is an aphorism by one of my favorite aphorists.
Oh my God, his voracious vocabulary.
What this says is, hay smells different to lovers and horses. Well, just the thought of lovers loving to mess around in the hay and then horses liking to eat it.
I think he's a bit of an Oscar Wilde character because he has an amazing wit.
He was the last child of our family, and he was always a comic.
I mean, that man loves to have fun.
I don't think he's crazy, but he's somewhere in there in the outer limits. You could say maybe he's out there where the buses don't run.
He gets away with murder.
And at the end of the table was this fuck doll.
He'll throw some zingers out there just to watch them squirm.
Like, you know, a blow up fuck doll.
Another adventure with Paul Ruschá. Anthony Appleworm is what we call him as well.
And this one, which I also set up, was done by Doug Metzler, and this is my life mask. I used to be able to pull the skin out from the edge of my jaw, and it looked like I was going to peel off my face. I wanted something that I'd be able to write on and give to people, and they would remember it, and then if they needed calligraphy, which was what happened, then they would call me, and I would do it. I went to Chouinard Art Institute. We had a wonderful lettering designer, Maury Nimoy. He encouraged us to try our hand with osmoroid pens. I never liked that part of it. I was always getting my fingers full of ink, and I put my pen away for many years. I started working as a waiter in a restaurant called Christopher's Restaurant, and it was the best restaurant in Oklahoma City. So this couple came in, and they were regular customers, and I took up a little card, and I wrote, reserved for Mr. and Mrs. John Doe, because I can't remember their names now. And that sort of like, effervesced my thinking into wondering if the rest of our regular customers might like that too.
Well, he did the menus for Christopher's Restaurant and the place settings for parties.
I know he did Kenny Rogers' wedding invitations.
A friend of mine had asked me if I would do the invitations and envelopes for Princess Anne's wedding, and so I did those.
Calligraphy was his major thing because he became so proficient at it.
Paul always has a calligraphy pen, always, wherever he goes.
And if you were to go up to him right now and tap his pocket, you would find a calligraphy pen in his pocket.
If you go to a restaurant with Paul, he'll very casually pull out his pocket full of pens and put them on the table, and hopefully the tablecloth has paper mats.
He'll write clever things on anything that's handy.
Well, once he wrote on a table, that was interesting.
And then he proceeded to start drawing on the tablecloth.
Sometimes he'll do it on a napkin, sometimes he'll do it on a menu.
Given a choice between a clean paper placemat and a dirty paper placemat, he's going to use the one with stains on it because it's an artifact of the day.
He likes to write out all sorts of things, and that becomes a memento.
He'll say, "What's your name?"
He will put some amazing, beautiful message on it.
Paul Ruschá at the whatever restaurant on this date, and they're universally delighted because no one has ever had something like that made for them.
I absolutely adore my collection of Paul Dinner calligraphy. But even more than that, I really love the creative way that he promoted his calligraphy through the postcards.
There is my Martyr for Love postcard. The thing about the Catholic Church, which is how we were brought up, my mother was a heathen and my father was a devout Catholic. The thing I loved about the church was the art in the church. St. Stephen, I think, was the first martyr. And so I wanted to do that. I remember working my elbows together in this shape and thinking, gee, that looks just like a heart. And okay, and then there was a an arrow that I had going through that. And so that's what it was. It was my take on the church, and it's Christian iconography.
Well, if I were to try and describe Paul Ruschá, I would have to say that he is someone that has really evolved over the years.
I, had a kind of a regular base of people that liked my calligraphy, and I did that. It wasn't going to feed me as well as I liked being fed, so I became a photographer. So I had a friend who shot a picture of me doing my calligraphy, and then when he was having the prints made of my picture, I was in the darkroom with his assistant photographer, who was also the publicity photographer for United Artists Records. Staff photographer said, well, why don't you take his job, because you know the darkroom now, and all you have to do is just become publicity photographer. And I didn't really know how to pick up a camera, and I earned as I learned. Lloyd Ziff and Eddie Leibovitz.
So in the 70s, Paul did this series of photographs called Social Tensions. And at first glance, they look like party snapshots. But then as you look a little closer, you see the tensions, the sweaty armpits, the lurker in the dark, the body language.
He had a real eye for catching people in a very kind of invisible way.
He sees delicacies that other people might not. He sees nuances in relationships that other people might just gloss over because he's so hypersensitive. And that comes out in some of his work, like the photography.
Several years later, my brother asked me to come to the studio and photograph all of his art, and that's what I do to this day.
He did take a keen interest in photography.
Ed finishes a painting or a drawing, and then I put it on the easel, set my f-stop, and I photograph it in 4x5 in 35, usually 60.
He's really helped out with photographing my work.
So everything gets documented.
Yeah, everything gets its own documentation.
And he helped me with other photographic projects. I photographed the streets of LA, and Paul was right away interested in that, and so it made it easy for him to help me and do this, but with his own sort of comic edge,
I began working full-time for him in 1990, and for 10 years I had worked at the Workbook, which is a graphic arts annual. Good morning.
And Paul came and worked there, and he was a terrible employee. He was not interested in the work. It was tedious. It was calling artists and ad agencies and verifying their information.
Then they wanted me to go into distribution. I'm not a salesman. So I turned around and came back, and I was complaining to Ed, and he said, well, why don't you come to work for me? And he said, I'll probably be a terrible boss, but he's the best boss I ever had.
Ed has, in the art world, a sort of a massive weight. He's sort of a legend right now, I think, for the sort of cool school artists. Paul is in the middle of that world. He's actually overseeing portions of that world for Ed. He meets the people that are involved with it. He sees the work being created.
Ed is Paul's big brother, obviously, and there is that family thing that goes on.
It's my photo studio.
But Paul has consistently been in the studio for such a long time. Ed really relies on Paul's expertise.
Do you find you bounce ideas off each other?
Oh yeah, all the time, having ideas go back and forth, and he has a general reaction to most things, and I'm right there to pick up on it. So, and he's got unique kinds of observational takes on things.
Ed is his own entity for sure, but it's almost like two sides of the same coin with them. And that Paul's love of life and love of words and strange objects, I think, filter into Ed's work.
There are things that Paul contributes in more than a visual way.
The funny thing about Ed and Paul is that, like anyone else, they've had many phases in their life. And Paul, of course, knows Ed from when he was a little kid and can literally remember delivering paintings by, holding him onto the top of their station wagon. And so he's actually seen that progress over time. I don't really have an understanding of that. I think when you are around a person who is that famous and that influential in the arts, it must be a bit overwhelming at times.
Well, I think it's been challenging for Paul. But he has his own world that he has lived in. Even though he's close to Edward and works with Edward, he is his own man and definitely does things on his own, and that curiosity is never completely satisfied.
He's definitely affected by it. But I do think that a lot of his spaces involve him stepping away from that.
Hey, come on in. Welcome to El Gran Garage. El Gran is a bow truss building, so it's got a rounded roof. Inside is built my house here.
He's almost built this wall of insulation around him. He's controlling his environment.
I love to come here and just chill out. That's the first thing I do. I don't get to really take naps because I work in Los Angeles, except that because I'm narcoleptic, I keep falling asleep all the time, and the poor woman that works with me has to watch me all day falling asleep while she's toiling away.
I've known him for over 50 years. People don't know everything that he's done. Everything is an art form to Paul.
Well, that's because I see art in everything.
Why is that?
Because I have to. Otherwise, I'm not very happy.
I think to a certain extent, Paul does not appreciate the significance of his own work.
And I really made it my mission to shine a light from my little corner of the world, to shine a light on him and his work, and do whatever I could to show him that he's important.
When did I see Paul's interest in art? All of his life.
Paul is probably one of the most creative people I've ever met, and in the most unusual way.
Another page for calligraphy.
Well, it's interesting because he almost has a Great Depression era sort of mentality of not throwing anything away.
I almost want to keep them because they're not little baggies. They're just pieces of paper that are in between this and the backing.
It would be no surprise to go over to Paul's and find little ketchup packets from the early 60s. And, he's got a sick obsession for things like that.
I go over and he has all these plastic bags, and I said, what are you doing with those plastic bags? Why don't you throw those bags out? And then he makes something out of them. I'm like, see?
The plastic paintings fascinate me because in typical Paul fashion, he took divider sheets that would normally be thrown away.
He removed all the red tape and the negatives, and he painted on that. Nobody ever thought to do that.
These guys.
He did a bunch of these beautiful paintings on these 30 by 40 acetate sheets and had a show at Schofa Gallery in the 80s. And then he did this piece called Rainbow of Paint, which is an assemblage of acetate painting and his back x-rays.
It's colorful, but it's symmetrical and very calculated. It's beautiful, but it relates a lot to his broken back and the things he went through trying to rehab from that.
He also did a self-portrait on acetate with a really intriguing name.
Self-portrait as Kirk Douglas playing Vincent van Gogh in Lust for Life. He painted it on the reverse side of a piece of acetate, and that broke my brain to think about how he did that, because you have to paint in reverse order.
I've known him for 30 years, and he continues to surprise me with the work that he produces.
There's a new body of work coming out that involves all the scavenged and retained vacuum molded plastic containers that virtually everything you buy in nowadays comes in.
I began admonishing my friends who would buy something and then just rip right through the middle of, this plastic.
And he would like, what are you doing? And he says, that's part of my art, that's what I do.
Most people throw those vacuum forms away, of course, and once they're thrown away, you can almost never go back and identify the object that it was made for. But Paul can probably give you a lineage on things like that. There's an example of his observational skills.
It looked like art to me, and so now, everybody saves it for me.
His contribution to Circle of Truth, there is a blank CD and a little piece of plastic from packaging, and he drew on them.
He likes these weird shapes.
But I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it.
And then one day he got a great idea on how to make them interesting art.
I have a little thing right here. Which I think I got this at Pick and Save.
He took it to another level, though. He not only presents them, but he photographed them, and the way he's lit them.
This is the next one, which turned out pretty well. It looks almost like a tweezer.
The way they're against that rich background.
This was little bag clips.
Really brings out what I think he sees in those as an art form.
Oh, this will be nice. Like this.
What Paul is showing in his work is that you don't need to have sophisticated tools. You don't need to have a fancy studio. You don't need to have an expensive camera.
So this one coming up is good because it looks like saints.
You need to have a brain that's fully engaged in the world around you and that sees things in new ways.
He's a great curator of the common.
He's constantly repurposing things, mundane things in his world, whether it's a piece of mail or a piece of plastic or a piece of canvas that somebody else discarded.
I worked as a display printer at Rothschild's Clothiers in downtown Oklahoma City. They would throw out all of the cards that they printed, for the sale items, and so I would save them and then print on the backs of them. I loved finding Dada in just about everything then, and I was pretty young. I did this thing that said Dada. Is Dada alive? Is Dada dead? What does Dada do? Dada doesn't. Dada isn't. Dada is. Dadaism. And then lowercase Dada. This was book 7.
I think as an artist, what he's done is document things.
There's another one, pressed by number 4. I did 33 volumes of my collection of inspection stickers. When I was in high school, I got a shirt and I noticed there was something in the pocket and I pulled it out and it was an inspection sticker and it said, inspected by number 34. And I thought, God, how weird. This little slip of paper represented a human being who inspected my shirt.
And it wasn't just inspection stickers in the Anthony Appleworm scrapbooks. I mean, there's drawings and poems and observations, and it's just an interesting look into the mind of Paul Ruschá.
He realizes that there are ways anywhere he is to sort of find things that have this sort of language to them. I mean, they can be these little hangers.
These things are when you buy new socks, they just look just like black swans.
Right, a sock holder. Who would think that it's a swan except Paul Ruschá?
This is a little saw, but the lock got misplaced and I didn't want to throw that out because it looked just like an anteater. And there's an ant. And the blade was so wonderful, I put it on my wall in here because it looks just like an angry parrot. The centipede, is this ranch. They look just like a centipede.
Paul is fascinated by multiples of things.
He loves stickers, and he's created his kitchen cabinets with stickers that he has gotten off of anything and everything.
Well, I just kept doing it until it was like, there was no more room.
The ceiling has a crack in it that he's labeled it as
this San Andreas's fault because he caused that earthquake and it damaged my ceiling.
You know, instead of patching it up and making it right, it's a piece of art.
I almost want to say, you should have taken your house and put it in this exhibit.
Some of the artwork he makes is made from found objects.
Well, I really liked doing the dinner for Doris, dinner for W, and then dinner for Donald. We're now on the inner circle. This is dinner for W. And originally this was from a setting that I did in 1970. It was called Dinner for Doris, and it had to do with Doris Day, who was at odds in the news with Charles Manson. And there were other people at odds with one another in the news, and that was Andy Warhol and Valerie Solanas, who shot him. You know, and I thought the most interesting thing would be for these people to have, you know, to have dinner together. Except I thought, well, you might as well just make it a whole thing where you eat, you dine, you shit, and then you get up and go in and lie down and sleep.
No matter what his product, his real product was himself.
Yes, Paul is himself a work of art, and it's probably been that way since he was a tiny boy.
He's got that thing that's hard to explain, and yet that's the plane he lives on, and so you might say we're momentarily living into Paul's world.
He wanted to be amusing to everyone in every classroom.
And he'd almost say anything. I remember he asked a priest if it was in class, if it was a sin to kiss, and then he said, well, is it a sin if we kiss is horizontal in front of them?
Had a big crush on him in high school. He was a vivid personality.
I always got along with him. We didn't have like sibling rivalry, and rarely did I feel like I had to crack him across the head for any reason.
What was your first impression of Paul?
He scared the hell out of me. He had fun with me. I didn't know what to make of him. And then I decided I just was in love with him. I would describe him as just an exuberant, funny piece of art.
This is Paul at 70. Here he is, 11 years later. He's Dorian Gray. He still looks the same.
Well, people want to depict Paul because he's so charming, and he's such a good subject because he's so plastic.
He always had that flexible face.
And he's double jointed.
Is he? Wow.
I remember him coming around one day, and he had. I looked at Paul and I said, "God, what's with your eyes? You've got something in your eyes." And he said, "Yeah, they're Mylar lenses."
Paul is a muse to himself. He did these 4 spreads for Stuff magazine using his body as art, whether as a turkey butt.
Doesn't it look like a breast you'd like to just have a sandwich from?
Or his belly button in Isadora Duncan Dada Death Club, or my favorite, Paul as a spider.
Paul's face is like Jim Carrey. It's very movable, it's like rubber. But I did base this character on Paul Ruschá, and he's sort of a priest-like character. It's called What's Lost is Things We Lose in Our Lives. And I kind of see Paul as a priest-like character.
I don't paint people that I know except Paul Ruschá again and again. The contradiction of Paul, the bad boy and the angel, right? The devil and the angel. I think the reason that I paint is because of the puzzle, and Paul is that. He is that puzzle.
He can, inhabit these different lives and these different people, and that's probably why his art is so varied, and that's why his friendships are varied, and the people who paint him, the paintings of him are so different.
I think that in years to come, Paul will be discovered in the way that we have discovered him, not as a gadfly in the world of the 60s and pop art, but as a participant in that world. as a muse and a collector and as a creator.
I think he's a real artist. Perhaps not as much as in his output of art as in his lifestyle and the way he is, just the way he is.
He's a butterfly going around and pollinating every flower he can find, you know, and that's, for him, that's the joy of it and the fun of it.
He would jump from one thing to another, and he was good at most everything he tackled.
Well, because of the nature of his character, which is off the wall and has had many ins and outs with the weirdnesses of the world, and we all have those when we decide to call ourselves artists.
When I was at Chenard, I began to paint, and I really, you know, I felt I wanted to be a painter.
With the Sunday Painters, I remember he was coming up with various ideas. I mean, one Sunday he'd tell me he was going to do the people on a milk carton, and then he was coming up with something that was abstract.
He's very exploratory in what he's done, but birds are definitely a theme.
He was centered on birds at that time, making little drawings and making them into playing cards, and one of the best things is dead ducks falling.
He did these simple, elegant swans on the cover of the Christopher's restaurant menu.
He has a thing for ducks. You have to ask him.
Why birds?
Yeah.
I don't know, I've just always loved them. I used to always do drawings and paintings of them as a kid.
Paul tells the story of when he was a kid in art class and he was painting this Canada
I
goose.
brought it out to show her, and she like screamed and got really mad because I'd painted it lavender blue or something.
To him, it looked fine. And that's because Paul is mostly colorblind.
The deck of cards is one of my favorite of Paul's works.
Well, I've always been an addict for solitaire, and I thought I'd like to design my own deck of cards.
Birds show up in many of Paul's works, and I think that's kind of an alter ego for Paul.
I changed the spots from hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades to ducks, doves, buzzards, and blue jays.
In his cards, you know, they're taking drugs and or other things like alcohol.
It's his sense of humor. It's almost surrealism, but Paul style.
And the jokers were my life mask, and then the other one was the Martyr for Love.
He never got around to having them printed. And so after reading that, my husband's a graphic designer, and I said, Randy, this is a big project, but would you be willing to take this on and get this deck of cards printed? And we did that.
Wow. Why does Paul love solitaire? Well, he is, in spite of being apparently a social butterfly, he is also in many ways, I think, a very shy and solitary person. And he spends so much time around other people and public figures and even famous figures. And so he needs deep solitude.
So I think when it comes to Paul supporting the arts, it is the majority of the interest may be a love of artists. I think he loves to be around creative people.
It just is fascinating, the process of making art and the way it makes you feel when you're making it. And then I think about the artists who have made the art that I love and how they must have felt when they were making it.
Paul is one of the most generous people I've ever met, and he has helped along a lot of artists' careers, many, many artists.
He's always celebrating other people and telling stories about why somebody is amazing, why their art is amazing, but he doesn't talk about himself very much.
Paul looks at people and he finds the thing that he has in common with them.
I think sometimes overlooking himself as an artist, which is one of the reasons we wanted to do a show specifically of Paul, and not Paul as a collector, but Paul as a muse and Paul as a creator, because as much as it's important for him to have been around other artists, I think his own work is equally valid and important, and that's what we wanted to celebrate in the show.
I think we've got the best example of Paul is really this exhibit out here, which I think rounds him out. Take all of these things together and they're little realms, and you categorize them and all that, and it all comes back into making almost like a little sketchbook of Paul Ruschá's, you know? And it works.
What would life be like without art for you?
Guess I'd be a garbage collector. As you see, I do collect a lot of garbage here.
I think what has always bonded me to Paul is his authenticity. He's just such a real human being. Yes, he does want to entertain you, but he's got a strand of, I don't know, deep humanity that is there at all times.
He's just one of the kindest people I've ever known.
I can't imagine my life without Paul in it. I mean, I don't really remember life when Paul wasn't in it.
He is an inner child made manifest, and he has been able to keep that childish sense of wonder and creativity in a way that no one that I know of his age has done.
Mind-wise, I mean, he's just this kid within, and that's what I love about him so much, and somewhat protective of, because I never would want him to lose that.
What is the Paul Ruschá philosophy on life?
It starts with capital F, and it stands for fun. Just to have fun. I mean, what else can you have in life that isn't besides fun? Yee. Although, I miss the mustache. The mustache is now like white or something. I'm going to do your name.
What did you use to cut your hair?
A flow bead. It is a personal home hair cutting system. And I saw it on TV one night, God, 30 years ago, and I thought, gee, that looks like something I'd like.
That works really well.
It does. It's pretty even. There are downsides, but we don't talk about those.